Throughout its history, Doctor Who has boasted a wide range of companion characters, each yielding drastically different responses across the board. Some of them went on to be larger-than-life icons, who've helped to define the very identity of the show itself, and others who are, shall we say, less than popular footnotes who at the very least got to feature in a fan-favourite story or two. Being a Doctor Who fan, naturally I have some basic takes surrounding these characters where I agree with the common consensus. I think Sarah Jane Smith is brilliant, and I totally understand why she's the ultimate representative for the classic companion. I think that Dodo Chaplet is the worst First Doctor companion, and I'm glad that she went away as quickly as she did. And yes, I think Martha Jones deserved better, just how the writing itself wanted you to feel. That said, I also have some spicy hot takes here and there. As love her or hate her as she seems to be, Tegan Javanka is my favourite 80s companion. I am very, very, very not a fan of Clara Oswald, no matter how influential she was in the lore, and I just don't really care for Captain Jack Harkness in the long run. But then there's the intriguing subject of a certain Miss Victoria Waterfield. A companion of the Second Doctor's tenure who mostly spans a single season on TV, she seems to have an honestly unfair reputation among fandom, not at all helped by the fact that about half of her episodes are among those currently absent from the BBC archives, which only contributes to obscuring and distorting her legacy further. Fan consensus on Victoria seems to range from sweet but ultimately useless and underdeveloped to an annoying, outright terrible damsel in distress stereotype, who only contributes to classic Who's unflattering representation of women. Now, whether or not Victoria is good representation for women is a topic that I, as a cis man, don't feel equipped to cover. I'll leave that for a female content creator to discuss. But as a fan of the character, her journey on the show, the stories and season she appeared in, and what she ultimately represents, I feel compelled to take a different approach when analysing her. An approach that I actually do feel equipped to discuss. For you see, I think Victoria is a perfect case study of anxiety. Now, a character's background doesn't necessarily have to feed into their internal emotional journeys, but it doesn't exactly hurt to take that route. And with a show like Doctor Who, where we can pick people up from all over time and space and experience the universe through their own unique perspective, it's honestly a no-brainer to have their natural environments influence their attitudes and mentalities, to make each of them feel distinct. With that in mind, Victoria Waterfield is a rather sheltered middle to upper-class teenager from the mid-1800s. Admittedly a relatively easy springboard to launch an anxious companion character from, especially when you take her out of her comfort zone and put her in alien conflicts, but there is of course more than that. By the time we first meet her in the series, she had already lost her mother at a relatively young age, which would surely be enough to harrow most families to their core and leave long-lasting negative psychological impacts on their relatives. But to add insult to injury, the setup for her debut story involves her father's scientific experiments being infiltrated by the goddamn space fascists themselves, the Daleks, who invaded the house they were staying at, took advantage of the curiosity and greed of people she relied on for stability, kidnapped her and held her hostage to ensure her father's cooperation in their own experiments. And then by the end of the adventure, she's been body-checked and had her privacy invaded by said space fascists, manhandled, been forced to leave familiar surroundings which were then subsequently blown up, had her timidness taken advantage of to lure others into a trap, watched her friend Kemmel be murdered right in front of her, and ultimately became an orphan. Yeah, I wouldn't expect anyone, let alone a timid Victorian-era teenager, to be a total badass who takes all that on the chin. Now, admittedly, she isn't particularly front and centre in her debut. She is plot relevant and easy to feel sympathy for, of course, but she is mostly off-screen as a prisoner of the Daleks whom Jamie intends on rescuing, so I get that she may be hard to form immediate attachment to. That said, however, we do spend a lot of time with her father, Edward, whom is basically an emotional wreck. He's highly distressed not only by his daughter's imprisonment at the hands, well, plungers of these foul creatures, but also from the guilt that stems from the murders that the Daleks commit throughout. Murders which would not have happened had Edward not inadvertently allowed the Daleks passage through his experiments. Like with Victoria herself, Edward is extremely anxious and emotionally vulnerable, and we do see both of them repeatedly yearning to be reunited and expressing concern for each other. Thus it's clear that this father and daughter have a strong and highly empathic emotional bond. So when Edward is mercilessly gunned down in the Dalek city by the end, and among his last thoughts is a panicked plea for the Doctor to look after Victoria for him, it's pretty moving stuff. Even though Victoria in herself is already pretty sympathetic as an innocent bystander who didn't deserve any of this, it's through Edward's guilt and concern for her well-being where we can become even more invested in her. Not to mention the Doctor feeling somewhat personally responsible. So there's Victoria, the lone surviving captive of the Daleks, on the surface of a hostile, unfriendly planet, God knows how far away from her own, now learning that the person she mutually understood the most, her own father, is gone, and that she might never find that same connection with another person. Which is why her becoming a companion of the Second Doctor is honestly a stroke of genius. The Second Doctor is my favourite iteration of the character for a lot of reasons, many of which I'll detail in another video this month. But a specific aspect which applies here is how nervous and uncertain he himself can be, particularly in moments of tension or crisis. He can still be very courageous in spite of that, of course, but that doesn't mean each battle against evil isn't a frantic, heart-racing scramble. So you put this recently orphaned, frightened and alone youngster in a scenario where she needs a father figure who can not only look after her, but who she can confide in and relate to emotionally. You can see why this pairing is great now, right? It gets even more compelling if you consider this as a follow-up to the first Doctor's long-running paternal or grandfatherly streak with not only Susan, but also Vicky and kind of Dodo as well. I don't know, she's a bad example. But yeah, if the Second Doctor still seems a bit hard to connect with for certain viewers, then putting him in the position of a protective guardian might help bring him down to earth some more for them. Anyway, with no way of getting back to her own time, the TARDIS is the only place Victoria could turn to now, with both the Second Doctor and Jamie looking after her. And thus began one of my favourite character journeys of any regular in all of Doctor Who. A journey of mental health and yearning for stability. That's the truly tragic thing about Victoria's time on the TARDIS. In theory, the Doctor and Jamie are pretty much the perfect and ideal guardians for her, and in any other scenario they would have remained so. They're supportive and warm to her, and the three of them have a tightly knitted and protective bond, but they can also be a little cheeky and playfully youthful. It feels like a genuine family dynamic, and exactly the kind of support network that Victoria needs. But life on the TARDIS can be dangerous and honestly mentally scarring, and when you stop and think about it, Victoria might have had one of the most traumatizing tenures of any companion, with a long string of heart-wrenching experiences and truly sadistic people and creatures playing with her emotions and preying on her seemingly timid nature. And when experiences like that build up, on top of emotional fragility from an already tragic past, it can get overwhelming. So the overall criticism of Victoria can be summed up as, she's just a helpless, screamy damsel who doesn't contribute anything. She's just terrified and crying all the time, and that's just annoying. And I'm like, am I missing something here? Are we watching the same show? Okay, so yes, she is undeniably a pretty apprehensive young woman who often responds to harrowing experiences with overwhelming fear. Hell, there are some cases where the villains she encounters outright weaponize her terror against her, and by extension, the Doctor. Upon meeting the Great Intelligence for the first time, it hypnotizes her into a hysterical state to try and convince the Doctor to leave in the TARDIS, to the point where the Doctor has to counter-hypnotize her into forgetting that meeting in order to repair her mind. Her encounter with Salamander's assistant Bennick is particularly uncomfortable, as he makes it abundantly clear in his own twisted way that he's willing to torture her to get Jamie to talk. And of course, both the Great Intelligence and the seaweed creature resort to kidnapping her to guide the Doctor's actions and ensure his cooperation. So yes, Victoria's meekness can often be her biggest hindrance. But at the same time, it can also be her biggest strength. It's kind of ironic that the characters in-universe who take Victoria at face value and see her as nothing more than a useless damsel often end up getting the rug pulled out from under them. Victoria isn't oblivious, she is very aware of how timid she might seem, to the point where she even openly jokes about it.
Don't worry, Camel. I shall protect you. I shall see they do you no harm. Yes, I suppose it was a bit silly.
But she's also smart and perfectly capable of using that apparent timidness to her advantage. Kaftan holds Victoria at gunpoint. Victoria cries, "Behind you!" and Kaftan assumes that's just a trick, when there really is a Cybermat behind her, which proceeds to jump on her shoulder and Victoria shoots it, which is pretty awesome in its own right. But yeah, later when Kaftan once again has the gun, Victoria actually does pretend to see danger behind her this time, which Kaftan now falls for following her past experience, therefore allowing Captain Hopper an opportunity to disarm her. It's logically consistent and pretty damn clever on her part. Victoria wants to explore the monastery's inner sanctum, but Tomney won't let her, so sweet and dainty little Victoria feigns illness and Tomney falls for it. And then when he lets his guard down, she uses that opportunity to escape his company and go exploring the inner sanctum. As a prisoner of the Ice Warriors, the Doctor wants to foil their planned destruction of the nearby Britannicus base, so to catch Zondal off guard at the crucial moment, Victoria pretends to cry and claims that she sees water seeping into the ship. And of course the ultimate example, her screaming, the vocal representation of her fear, turns out to be the one thing that the seaweed creature is vulnerable to. Victoria may genuinely be anxious a lot of the time, but she is perfectly capable of weaponizing it to deceive or undermine opponents, a technique that she shares in common with the Second Doctor himself, which only further showcases how well they work as a daughter/foster-father duo. On top of that, she can push herself past her crippling fear and be incredibly brave and self-sacrificing, especially if the Doctor or Jamie themselves are in danger. She'll go down the dark, abandoned underground tunnels looking for Jamie and the Doctor to warn them that Travers suspects them. She'll shove a trolley into a group of armed guards to give Astrid a chance to escape, even if she knows she herself can't. She'll risk getting shot by the Ice Warriors to tell the Doctor some vital information. She'll help attack a Cyberman to make it let go of the Doctor. Hell, despite how on edge the Cyber Tombs make her, she opts to stay up on guard by herself longer than expected in a thoughtful gesture of allowing the Doctor some extra rest. See, that's the thing, she is trying. Victoria has a lot of courage and you vultures don't give her credit for that. And on top of that, she's also not afraid to dish it out to someone even if they're intimidating her. Her later interactions with Kaftan and who she thinks is Salamander showcase this.
Do you really believe you can bargain with those terrible Cybermen?
That is our concern, not yours.
I'm talking to him, not you.
So no, Victoria's trepidation is not some naive, fatal flaw of character writing that exists just for the sake of having a damsel. It's a deliberate artistic choice that influences how she reacts to things and gives her an overall internal journey to go on, challenged by uncomfortable scenarios that she must either be subject to or push herself to overcome across the 7 different stories. You know, an internal struggle. Something that can help a character feel like a real person. Though speaking of stories, I think it's time I tackle her final one in particular, and the cherry on top of what I think is one of Doctor Who's most underrated emotional arcs. You see, anxiety is a tricky thing. Just because she can manage to summon up courage and inner strength in these situations as they come, doesn't suddenly mean that they don't take a toll on her mentally. It gets to a point where, even though Victoria loves Jamie and the Doctor like a second family, the terror and peril they encounter on their travels in the TARDIS is just too much for her, and all she wants is peace of mind and stability. The fact that the telltale sign of the last villain she encounters is a rapid, almost panicked-sounding heartbeat isn't a coincidence in that regard. We all love that scene from Tomb of the Cybermen where the Doctor and Victoria discuss her grief, but I think another moment that deserves just as much love, and it probably would if the footage still existed, is from this story, which perfectly showcases the inner turmoil that anxiety can cause and how isolating it can feel. Jamie just peacefully sleeping in the middle of a crisis. Total faith that the Doctor can sort it out. No worries about where they'll go next. Victoria, on the other hand, pacing the room, overthinking, stressing out about the seaweed creature and its intentions and how it affects others, and how the three of them always seem to end up encountering danger everywhere they go. The Doctor comes in to comfort her, and she opens up to him about just wanting peace of mind. It's quite poignant stuff. Hell, even when the crisis is over and literally everyone survived, Victoria is still traumatized by this long build-up of angst, and I totally get it. Victoria then has what is probably Doctor Who's most bittersweet departure. She knows she can't continue travelling. She has to do what's best for her mental health and settle down, lead a peaceful life, and recover from the trauma of everything, from her encounter with the Daleks and onwards. But doing that includes parting ways with the Doctor and Jamie, her foster family, and the only two people she really had left. It's a heartbreakingly tough decision, and I'd wager this might be Victoria's most courageous moment, deciding between stability or family. She might be the first companion to explicitly leave for mental health reasons, and I think in this day and age especially, it leaves an incredibly impactful message. I think some people might misunderstand her journey as her not wanting to be there, and ideally no. I imagine she probably wouldn't have chosen to become an orphan with no way of getting home, whose only salvation came in the form of an incredibly dangerous and unpredictable joyride through the universe. But it's obvious from her loving and caring relationships with the Doctor and Jamie that she really wanted to make it work and cope with the cards that the universe handed her. She wanted to, but the tragedy is she just couldn't. So yeah, that's why I stick up for Victoria Waterfield. She is not just a damsel, she is so far beyond that. She's a brilliant commentary on mental health and coping with the struggles that come with anxiety. Hopefully I've helped some of her biggest critics to see the light on this. And if not...